forward by the noble and Lord Hope is the right one.
I think one thing that is significant is when the noble Baroness Chakrabarti congratulates the government. I think that's a significant and not minor moment. But she was right to do so. The importance of journalistic freedom cannot be underestimated, and I'd like to thank the noble lords who put that amendment forward on this bill and actually turned something which has been discomforting into something positive at the end of it all. So that's very positive. I also wanted to just note in passing that when I was considering how I was going to intervene today, I actually said to colleagues that it would be terrible that the noble Lord Paddock wouldn't be with us, because I would be relying on him to give us a steer. And then I walked in and he was in his place. And I would like to just pay tribute to his courage for being here and the reassurance it gives many of us. But that really takes some courage. Right, on to the substantive point. I think the noble Lord Coker did us a great service when he spent his weekend not demonstrating, but looking at everybody else's demonstrations and laying them out for us on a kind of average weekend, as it were. And they weren't particularly glamorous or big or headline-grabbing demonstrations, but all of them were undoubtedly caused disruption for the people in the local area in the way that he explained, and blocked roads quite substantially. And the reason why I think that that's important is because throughout the discussions on this bill, it's always felt as though in our minds we've had in our sights the likes of Extinction Rebellion, the Just Stop Oil, and the people who the noble and learned Lord Hope explained well, I think, that their aim is to disrupt. That's not even to protest. That's their tactic and their raison d'etre. And that has caused a lot of problems, I think, for me, somebody who supports the right to protest very strongly, and also has certainly aggravated the British public in all sorts of ways. But the reason why the noble Lord Coker's intervention was so useful was to remember the laws of unintended consequences. And I say this to the government, which is that they aren't the only people who are going to be caught up by this law, which is why I would like us to higher the threshold. Because the government won't always be the government. I mean, if we're talking about prolonged, it might not be that long. There will be all sorts of different people out on streets protesting, and sometimes it might even involve members of the government at the moment and their supporters. All of the protests that were described cover all types of members of the British public who felt the need to take to the streets one way or another. They're voters of all parties and voters of none. And they might well be disruptive, but they're certainly not using disruption as a tactic. And so my concern is just straightforwardly that they are not criminalised by this law in an unintended way, because we had one group of protesters in mind and we forgot the wide variety of protesters who support all parties across the board, and I anticipate there'll be more protesters in turbulent times ahead. And then the final point, I suppose, on this particular A1 that I wanted to make was that the noble and learned Lord Hope of Craighead made the point that when you're making laws, you can't use algorithms or numbers. So you are using words, and we're having an argument about words. And it is tricky, and I can't pretend when I hear the noble and learned lords speaking that I understand always the way language is understood by courts. But I was thinking about how language might be understood by the police, who are the people who will, after all, potentially, as has already been explained, look at a bunch of tractors or what have you and say that is capable of causing disruption. That's more than minor. It seems to me to be a much lower threshold than thinking it's going to cause a significant disruption. And I would like the word significant there so that the police pause just simply don't just go, it's more than minor, let's stop it. But that they pause and think, this has to be quite serious. Isn't that the way the language will be understood? And as a consequence of that, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, I mean, maybe they're all legal scholars, but my fear is that they will read those words and see it in a particular way, and that therefore there will be the unintended consequences of sweeping up people who, after all, are democratically demonstrating. And finally, because I realise that this is what everybody does, so that I don't speak in the D section, I am also, however, despite supporting wholeheartedly the Labour amendment on that, I am disappointed with the amendment D1 from the Labour Party. I think I understand what they mean by conduct which is frivolous and vexatious beyond a genuine expression of their right to protest, but it just seemed to me to be an unnecessary concession, and I'll find it very hard to vote for. But beyond that, I hope and urge everyone to support the Lord Coker's amendment in this section.
My Lords, I'll be very, very brief. I just want to thank my noble